on this Sunday night, hours into the new COVID rules, and the rule breakers are out. Hundreds show up for an impromptu car show in Ontario.
The participants should be ashamed of themselves.
What fines do they now face? The surge in cases at work sites.
If there's breakdowns in the system, we're going to see a pretty impressive rise in cases.
Have protocols lapsed? Plus, the controversy over a highway through one of the world's most important heritage sites. And the constant reminder of a Canadian hero. 40 years after the Marathon of Hope.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with breaking news. Associated Press is reporting that American federal agents have detained a woman trying to cross from Canada into the United States. The suspect in question was wanted in connection with a dangerous package that was intended for the White House. The package contained the poison ricin, and it was addressed to U.S. President Donald Trump, but was intercepted at a sorting facility. The RCMP says it has been working with the FBI because the package originated from Canada. Now to the other big story. Concerns Canada is in the second wave of the pandemic. In Quebec, restrictions are ramping up to fight off a surge of COVID-19. In the last 24 hours, new cases in Quebec topped numbers that haven't been seen since late May. That province recorded 462 new cases of COVID-19. There was one death. The hardest hit areas are in the province's most populated centers, Montreal and Quebec City. Health officials raised the alert level there late today, imposing even tougher restrictions to keep people safe. They include limiting private gatherings from 250 people down to just 25. Political leaders have tried to limit gatherings in Ontario too, but that doesn't seem to be working. Just hours after new restrictions and fines were announced in that province, police had to break up an impromptu party that drew in hundreds. Mike LeCouture reports.
Somehow, this is still happening. Warnings of a second wave, new limits on outdoor gatherings, and threats of stiff fines didn't stop hundreds of car lovers from congregating in Hamilton Saturday night.
Is it worth a $750 fine potentially?
No. No.
Yet there he was. Perhaps he was laughing because Hamilton police did show up, but didn't hand out any tickets.
The actions last night, in light of the concern with COVID-19, are abhorrent. The participants should be ashamed of themselves. And if we can identify them and we are able to lay charges down the road, we will certainly be doing that.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford didn't pull any punches, saying in a statement, quote, "The reckless behavior that we saw in Ancaster last night was totally unacceptable." And it came just hours after Ontario announced stricter limits on outdoor and indoor gatherings. Cities across Quebec have increased police patrols to now include bars and restaurants, ensuring health guidelines are being followed. Brampton, Ontario has been just as aggressive, and it's paid off.
We had bylaw out in full force this weekend, but there was only 3 tickets that had to be issued. And I put that in context. Our worst weekend in July, we had to issue 120 tickets.
And if there isn't more of that, we could see more of this. Thousands of cars snaked around the home of the Ottawa Senators to get tested for COVID-19 at this pop-up facility. Dozens of paramedics from across the region came together over the weekend to take some of the pressure off of other testing centers that have been overrun.
Yeah, Brewer Park would have been insane trying to stand in line with him for hours on end.
With a sick child, Jackie Lorette chose to sit in her car for 4 hours instead. And with schools being very strict, she's weighing another difficult decision.
Any symptom they show at school, it's either you get tested or they send us home. Kind of thinking of switching them to homeschooling.
Some say health officials should have anticipated increased demand for testing as students went back to school. Those on the front lines contend they're trying to be as nimble as possible.
The speed at which the hospitals, our paramedic partners, and the community have adjusted, we're doing the best that we can with the amount of resources that we have to work with.
But more may be needed as the province and the country brace for the second wave of COVID-19. Mike LeCouture, Global News, Ottawa.
Cases aren't just on the rise in Ontario and Quebec. Spikes are being seen across the country. Here's the picture from the regions that are reporting today. Manitoba added 29 new cases. Most are in Winnipeg. Saskatchewan saw 20 new cases. And Nunavut has now recorded its first 2 coronavirus cases. Those 2 cases in northern Canada are raising concerns about people who fly in and out of remote communities for work. The 2 people who were infected worked at a gold mine, but acquired the virus at home. As Heather Yerkes-West explains, health experts say it's more important than ever for vulnerable communities to remain vigilant.
Knowing an outbreak could be devastating, careful controls have spared most of Canada's northern communities from the impact of COVID-19.
Some of that's just because of travel patterns, but another major reason is because many of these communities have taken very, very careful steps to prevent the importation of COVID-19.
A government spokesperson says 2 cases recently reported at a Nunavut gold mine pose no risk to the surrounding community. But they do serve as a reminder that as cases across the country rise, work sites filled with a fly-in, fly-out workforce are the perfect breeding ground for the virus. Right now, there are 4 active outbreaks at work camps within Alberta's oil sands.
As long as that kind of heightened awareness is there and prompt action is taken, in response to positive tests or people with symptoms, I don't think that it poses a specific risk to the neighboring communities.
BC, Quebec, and Alberta currently have the highest case counts per capita. But more than 6 months into the pandemic, fatigue is setting in. This Calgary restaurant owner says more and more he's seeing customers unwilling to follow COVID-19 protocols.
Everyone is now starting to see more and more issues every day with people not wearing masks, refusing to wear masks. When they're asked to wearing masks, it's everything from them walking out to up into grabbing items, throwing them, getting very aggressive, up to the point where near violence is occurring.
And that's a big concern as summer clicks to fall and cold and flu season sets in.
If we all fill our end of the bargain, we can really ensure that that curve doesn't skyrocket. But of course, if there's breakdowns in the system, we're going to see a pretty impressive rise in cases.
A clear reminder of what's at stake for the months ahead. Heather Yerkes-West, Global News, Calgary.
The U.S. is approaching a grim milestone in the COVID-19 pandemic. Nearly 200,000 Americans are confirmed to have died from the virus, though the real number is likely higher. No other nation has recorded as many deaths or cases. And as Jackson Prosco reports, there are predictions the number of fatalities could more than double by the end of 2020.
6 months and 200,000 deaths later, there are still new COVID-19 hotspots popping up across the U.S. On average, there are more than 35,000 new cases recorded nationwide every single day.
There's still no plan or strategy. There will be 300,000 deaths by December 1st and maybe even 400,000 deaths by the time of the next presidential inauguration.
One influential model predicts 415,000 deaths by January 1st.
Decisions were made on some level to open up everything, and I don't think that we had a good enough hand on it.
Nurse Dana James saw the worst of the pandemic at her Florida hospital in August. Cases have come down. She worries Americans will let down their guard, allowing the virus to surge again.
Walk one day in my shoes, have one 12-hour shift alongside with me, and maybe you'll change your mind.
Despite all that's been lost, the U.S. is still wrapped up in the same debate about how to respond. President Donald Trump continues to question the effectiveness of masks.
There are a lot of people think the masks are not good.
He's defying COVID-19 restrictions with indoor rallies while promising magical cures.
Well, the virus will disappear. It will disappear.
Everyday Americans are waging the same fight themselves. Despite the virus spreading largely uncontrolled, there's still a push to reopen everything from schools to restaurants and bars.
We can do all those things, but you've got to do one thing. We've got to bring the entire nation down to some agreed upon low level of containment.
That may mean turning back the clock, bringing back some restrictions, especially over the winter.
We should be ready to reimpose mandates in order not to overwhelm our hospitals and save lives. So let's not repeat the same mistake we made before.
There's plenty of hope riding on the development and deployment of a vaccine, but that could take a year or more to happen. And in the meantime, COVID-19 continues to spread far and wide, and there's little being done to stop it. Robin.
Jackson Prosco in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. The U.S. president plans to submit his nominee for the Supreme Court this week, and he says it will be a woman. Democrats are pushing back, just as the Republicans did when they blocked Barack Obama's nominee. As Jennifer Johnson reports, this is just another fight that centers around the November election.
With crowds cheering, "Fill that seat" at a campaign rally, U.S. President Donald Trump promised he will do just that within days of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing.
I will be putting forth a nominee next week. It will be a woman.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is promising an immediate hearing. Critics are calling him a hypocrite after McConnell blocked President Barack Obama's Supreme Court pick for over 9 months, saying it was too close to an election. Democrats at a Supreme Court vigil for Ginsburg are sounding the alarm.
Mitch McConnell and his henchmen believe that they can ram through a Supreme Court justice only 45 days from the election. This fight has just begun.
Senate Democrats need just 4 Republicans to block the nomination. Already 2, Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, have said the decision should be made after the November 3rd election. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is vowing to stop the president, even if it means launching a new impeachment hearing against him.
We have our options. We have arrows in our quiver that I'm not about to discuss right now.
The president hasn't released a list of names of potential female nominees, but many believe Amy Coney Barrett is a frontrunner for the seat, believed to be anti-abortion and anti-gay marriage. Judge Barbara Lagoa, a Hispanic woman from swing state Florida, is also considered a top contender. Both are Trump appointees to federal appellate benches.
If the shoe were on the other foot and the Democrats had the White House and the Senate, they would right now be trying to confirm another member of the Supreme Court.
Even before a name has been submitted, tempers are flaring, further igniting what has already been a bitter, contentious election year. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
A U.S. federal judge has blocked Donald Trump's attempt to ban the popular messaging app WeChat. The judge ruled a ban would raise questions about First Amendment rights, which guarantee free speech. WeChat has more than 1 billion active users worldwide. It's owned by Chinese tech giant Tencent. The American government wanted to ban WeChat and TikTok, another Chinese-owned app, citing national security concerns. But President Trump is changing his tune on TikTok. He's approved a deal for Oracle and Walmart to acquire stakes in TikTok's U.S. operations.
The security will be 100%. They'll be using separate clouds and a lot of very, very powerful security. It will have nothing to do with China. It'll be totally secure. That'll be part of the deal.
The proposed deal calls for the 3 businesses to form a new U.S. company. Coming up, the push to rename a Canadian mountain. We'll explain the offensive history behind it. And some firsts in this year's Tour de France. Meet the young man making history for his country. The Canadian government is planning to remove an offensive name from a mountain in Banff National Park. Indigenous groups in Alberta say this is a step in the right direction, and they're now working on coming up with a new name. As Jamie Dahl explains, momentum is building to rename other prominent parts of the Canadian Rockies. And a warning, some language in this story is offensive.
It's hiked on, camped on, biked on. Tunnel Mountain is one of the most frequented peaks in Alberta's Bow Valley. And for generations of First Nations people, it's a sacred place.
They held ceremonies there. They held trading. They traded there at the mountain and so on, visited there and so on. It was a gathering place.
The name Tunnel was given to this mountain following a mistake by a surveyor for the railway who thought a tunnel might have to be drilled through it. It didn't happen, but the name stuck. However, the Indigenous people already had a name for it.
It was called Iniistako.
In English, Buffalo Mountain. It's easy to see why they called it what they did. A petition is now in the works to put pressure on the provincial government to change the name to Sacred Buffalo Guardian Mountain.
It's one of those wonderful things we can do that I would call forward reconciliation. In other words, it will enrich us all, and it will name this feature in a much more descriptive and powerful way. And there's agreement across all the First Nations with association with this place.
In nearby Canmore, an effort is also being made to change the name of a distinct rocky landmark. This peak doesn't actually have an official name, but the one commonly used does pop up on maps and blogs, and many are wondering why.
To use a name like Squaw's Tit, it's just another way that the mainstream society is saying to Indigenous people, like, we don't care about you. And it's not just like about squeamishness or morality, it's about ethics and social justice and caring for our fellow and sister human beings on this planet. It shows a lack of care for human life and respect.
There have already been 2 attempts to give the peak a lasting, less offensive name, but they haven't been approved.
I will say the government of Alberta has been very supportive, and part of it is coming up with a name that really is in keeping with the rich history and tradition of this area. And we need to be really intentional about that and make sure that the name that is chosen is one that will stick and that is one that will do justice to this beautiful mountain.
The Buffalo Treaty speaks to culture, conservation.
There's little arguing about what name Tunnel Mountain should be changed to among First Nations groups. In 2018, bison were reintroduced to the landscape of Banff National Park, and Indigenous leaders agree it's also time to bring back the original name of the mountain, resting in the heart of this iconic place. Jamie Dahl, Global News, Banff, Alberta.
Still ahead, heritage versus highway. The concerns over a new road near Egypt's pyramids.
You're watching Global National.
Take a look at this footage out of France tonight. A drone captured the moment a mobile home was swept away by floodwaters. The southern part of the country has been inundated with heavy rainfall, leading to flash flooding. At least 2 people have been reported missing. A highway project outside Cairo has conservationists concerned. The new road runs through an area dotted with ancient pyramids. The government insists no historic sites are being affected. But as Mike Armstrong explains, critics say the project may be paving its way through undiscovered archaeological sites.
The Egyptian government already tried to build this highway once. The project was started in the 1990s, but suspended after an international outcry. Well, it's going ahead now, barely 2 kilometers from a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Too close, says a former senior UNESCO official who already fought against it once.
Normally, in a World Heritage Site or in the buffer zone, because the World Heritage Site has a buffer zone around it, which allows some construction, provided there's been an environmental impact study made before.
One section of the new highway cuts right through a pyramid plateau south of Cairo. Among those on one side are the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid. On the other, several more, including Pepi I and II, as well as the Step Pyramid. Now, the Step is the oldest of all pyramids. It was built about 4,600 years ago. At that point in history, the region was, in fact, the Egyptian capital city of Memphis.
It had lavish palaces. It was a thriving city, and it was the largest city in Egypt during that time.
Critics say the highway would mean more pollution from vehicles that could damage pyramids. It might even mean paving over archaeological sites that haven't been discovered. Well, the government insists that isn't happening. The Minister of Tourism and Antiquities says nothing is being touched, that any project in Egypt has to be approved by the Antiquities Ministry first. The government says the highway is needed for development and points out there are existing roads even closer to the pyramids now. But there are critics, and there could be more. Some archaeologists contacted by Global News admit there's resistance to speak out publicly because there's fear if they do, the government might not give them permits to work in the country. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Up next, there's no stopping them now. How Canadians continue to honor Terry Fox's legacy 40 years later. Tadej Pogačar has a lot to celebrate tonight. The 22-year-old rode in his first Tour de France and won this year's yellow jersey. He's the first Slovenian to ever win the three-week event. He's also the youngest man to secure the Tour de France's top spot since the Second World War. The popular race is normally held in July, but its start date was pushed back by the pandemic. This month, we are honoring a Canadian hero who made a mark on our lives 40 years ago when he took it upon himself to run across Canada to raise money for cancer research. He never finished his dream, but others are doing it for him.
Way to go, Matthew!
Take Matthew White from Nova Scotia. He completed his 40th marathon 40 years after Fox's Marathon of Hope. White's runs raised over $5,000. He completed his goal on the same day thousands of other Canadians ran, walked, or cycled in the annual Terry Fox Run. Fox couldn't complete his goal because bone cancer had spread to his lungs. Cyclists in BC rode for 6 hours to raise money for cancer research. Among them was a 15-year-old who survived the same form of cancer as Terry Fox. Jacob Brendenhoff also had his leg amputated. That didn't slow him down as he rode alongside Fox's brother Daryl. Brendenhoff's ride raised nearly $90,000. And that is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Robin Gill. We leave you tonight with the Peace Tower in Ottawa flying the flag half-mast in memory of former Canadian Prime Minister John Turner. Turner died Friday. He was Canada's 17th Prime Minister. Thank you for watching. Good night.